Well, my name's Edward. I'm Edward Kennelly. I'm a writer for the California News and Views. Thank you for coming on to do an interview with me. We have Jacob Hornberger today. He's the founder and president of the Future for Freedom Foundation. He's the recipient of the Thomas Paine Award for his communications in the Libertarian Party. He was the keynote speaker of the 1996 Libertarian Convention. And now he is he's running for president of the Libertarian president. He's the presumptive nominee for the Libertarian Party for 2020. Thank you for coming on and doing an interview.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm actually not the presumptive nominee. I'm just one of the persons that are running for this nomination.
Oh,
so
okay, I got you. But you've won most of the states, though. You've won 7 states.
Yeah, I've won a lot of primaries and caucuses and straw polls, but it's a wide open race, and anybody can win this thing now. We're fighting for it like we were starting at the bottom.
Okay, I got you. Yes, sir. So I have a few questions I'd like to ask you about your campaign and your thoughts on the coronavirus.
Great. Thank you for having me on, Edward. I'm most appreciative.
So, why should somebody vote for you for president? How do you manage to win support from Republicans and Democrats?
Well, those are two separate questions. I don't hold much hope that Democrats and Republicans would vote for me because I'm going after them both. They are both jointly responsible for the plight in which this nation finds ourselves. They're jointly responsible for the destruction of our liberty, our well-being, and I say let's hold them both to account. What I want to go after is the people who are not Democrats and Republicans, people that don't vote, disaffected voters, African Americans that have paid the biggest price for the Democrat-Republican war on drugs, which is nothing but a Jim Crow type of government program. It's totally racially bigoted, not to mention the deadly and destructive and corrupt aspects of it. I want to go after Hispanics who have been vilified with this vicious, evil, immoral war on immigrants and this socialist system of immigration controls. I want to go after young people like your age, who have been plundered and looted and being told that you can't be trusted to take care of your parents and grandparents and other people in need, and that you need to be forced to do this through the Internal Revenue Service. Now, how do I intend to do that? With pure libertarian principles. That's what marks me out as different here. I keep telling the party is that this is a much more than a political race. This is a cause. This is a battle for the heart and soul of the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party. Does the party want to go with some kind of Republican light version of libertarianism, which I don't consider libertarianism at all? Or do we want to go with a pure campaign of principles for the party of principle, which is the motto that we ourselves put on ourselves? I say let's do something bold for a change, because with boldness comes the possibility of a big payoff. When you play it safe, you don't have that possibility.
Why do you think the libertarian approach is so important to the coronavirus? What role should the federal government have in combating the coronavirus?
It is an extremely important role, because it's only libertarianism that can pull us out of this crisis. And that would be the message that I would be telling the American people if I were accorded the honor of this nomination. I'd be saying, look, you have a choice here, and it's not just an esoteric choice anymore. That this is a choice of life and death. If you like the system that you live under, healthcare system, economic system, monetary system, stick with Biden or Trump. Doesn't matter which one you vote for, because they both support the same philosophy, the same system. That government should be centrally planning the economy, centrally planning healthcare, centrally planning the monetary sphere. With libertarianism, we offer an entirely different world, a different system, a set of systems, a new paradigm, if you will, that is based on liberty and free markets. So we would advocate a free market economic system. One, people keep everything they earn, no more withholding, 100% you keep it, and you get to save it, where you'd have savings to get through an emergency like this. And then a total free market healthcare system. It's the only way that's going to pull us out of this healthcare morass in which we find ourselves. And I've been saying that even before the coronavirus crisis. I published a book with my foundation in 1994 entitled The Dangers of Socialized Medicine. There's no other solution to America's healthcare crisis than the libertarian solution, which is a separation of healthcare and the state, giving government totally out of the healthcare business, and then a free market monetary system. The Federal Reserve right now is cranking up the printing presses like there was no tomorrow. They are debasing our currency, the likes of which really is unprecedented in American history. I want a free market monetary system, one where the government cannot destroy our medium of exchange. So when you look at these kind of different systems guided by a different philosophy, a libertarian philosophy, what I consider the finest philosophy in the history of mankind, then we have a way out of this morass in which we find ourselves.
How do you plan on doing away with government involvement in healthcare? Like we're so used to having, Medicare, Medicaid, they've been around for over 50 years. How do you, what do you plan on doing for people who are dependent on Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act?
Well, it's extremely difficult when you grow up in a system like this, because it's difficult to imagine what life is like without the system. And so, and you're growing up in public schools where they're teaching you that this welfare state way of life is freedom and free enterprise, and the indoctrination is very powerful. And then it's also, welfare statism is like a narcotic, that once you get on it, you get this mindset of dependency where people think, oh my gosh, there'll be people dying in the streets if government weren't taking care of people. Well, let me share with you a little bit of what life it was like before Medicare and Medicaid when I was growing up. That, I grew up in an entirely different system than what you're growing up in. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the poorest in the United States, Laredo, Texas. That's what the Census Bureau said, per capita income. Every day, doctors' offices were filled with poor people, including many people from Nuevo Laredo, which was right across the river. And the doctors knew that many, if not most of their patients couldn't pay. And it didn't stop them from treating the patients. I never heard of one instance where a doctor turned away anyone for inability to pay. They were still making a lot of money off the patients that were paying it, because income taxes at that point were still relatively low. The welfare state had not expanded exponentially yet. Mm-hmm. So doctors were still among the wealthiest people in town, but they gave back to the community by giving this free health care to the poor, the seniors, the needy. And the other thing is this: nobody had health care insurance because they didn't need it. Healthcare costs were so low and so stable that going to the doctors was like going to the grocery store. People just pay cash for the doctor because it was so low and stable. I mean, how many people have grocery store insurance today? Nobody does.
No one does.
They don't need it for grocery store prices. So then Medicare and Medicaid, oh, by the way, also doctors love what they did in life. And there was innovations and inventions coming out the gazoo. Then Medicare and Medicaid come into existence, and that was the end. That's what caused healthcare costs to soar. And that's what's bankrupting people today. That's why people started going and getting healthcare insurance. So if you knock out these programs, now all of a sudden, everybody, there's no more withholding. They're taking $2 trillion out of younger people's pockets. That's where they get the money, out of y'all's pockets, the younger people. I'm saying like 55 and below. Mm-hmm. Leave that $2 trillion in the pockets of the younger people. I have no doubts that y'all will take care of your parents if they need the help, or that y'all will use that money to help out others just with donations. I mean, this is what our country was founded on, the concept of voluntary charity, the notion that the IRS is needed to make Americans caring and compassionate is perverted. It's contrary to the principles of every religion. You don't force people to be good and caring. Good caring means coming out of the goodness of your heart, like those doctors in Laredo who were treating people for free.
Yeah. On a similar note, how do you plan on, what will you do with families who can't afford to send their children to school, like under your plan? I know you want to do voluntary education. How would these children learn how to read if they're not forced to go to school, or if they can't afford to go to private school?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I have long favored the total separation of school and state, the way our ancestors had the wisdom to separate church and state. We, at my foundation, we've actually published a book called Separating School and State, How to Liberate America's Families. The free market produces the best of everything. And that's our heritage, the free market.
Mhm.
Public government schooling is a classic example of a socialist system. We don't often think of it like that because Americans don't like to think of themselves as believing in socialism. But public schooling exists in Cuba, North Korea, China, Russia. Any socialist country is going to have public government school. So in a free market, you have the dynamics of entrepreneurs, educational entrepreneurs coming in and offering a wide array of educational services to consumers. That way families can treat each of their children differently because, as you know, each child is different. They may come from the same parents, but they're unique. They've got their special interests and their passions. The
Yes.
free market's able to satisfy those unique desires that adhere to each person. All right, so what about the poor? What about the people that really can't afford it? Well, first of all, we should acknowledge that the poor are the ones who pay the biggest price of public schooling, like people in the inner cities. I mean, they get horrendous educations compared to everyone else. And then there's that mindset that is produced in public schooling that smashes out of kids the natural love of learning that comes with being a human being. You look at any child from 0 to 6, he's got this awe of the universe, and he's absorbing everything, and he's bedeviling his parents with that 3-letter word, why. By the time a lot of young people graduate from high school, they're not asking that question anymore. They hate learning, they hate reading, they can't wait to get out of school. And that's what the regimentation, army-like public schooling does. Well, if you look at churches, the poor seem to have no problem finding churches to go to. The rich and the middle class are the ones that build those churches, but nobody locks out a poor person because he can't afford to get into a church. The wealthier and the middle class simply say, hey, that's great. Come on in. We don't care whether you donated or not. No churches check you at the door and see if you've donated. Well, the same thing would happen in education. You'd have, for one thing, in a free market, you'd have entrepreneurs catering to the poor, just as many restaurants cater to the poor, or automobile companies cater to poorer people. And then you've got the idea of scholarships and fellowships, and this is that concept of voluntary charity again. I mean, you see it all the time where you have the Rotary group or something raising money for a scholarship for students for this reason or that reason. And that's what we need to recapture again in this country, that concept of believing in ourselves and believing in others and believing in freedom, that it really does work, that when people are free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth, they really, many of them, not all, but many of them care enough to say, man, that guy in the ghetto, he needs an education. He's really bright. He's promising. He's driven to get an education. I'm going to help him out. So you'd have foundations that would be dispersing scholarship money to people who need it.
Yeah. And so several conservatives have been deplatformed from the internet, such as Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson. What do you think the government should do to address this issue, to stop the censorship of conservatives or any political commentator in general?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch a question.
Oh,
I got bad reception.
Sorry, there are several conservative commentators who have been deplatformed from the internet. Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson have been deplatformed from YouTube and Facebook and other social media platforms. What should the government do to address this issue, to stop the censorship of political commentators?
Well, I believe that any private institution has the right to run its operations the way it wants. I mean, that's the essence of private ownership. Mm-hmm. So a private radio station that wants to broadcast only conservative views has that right. And if
this is for the social media like YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah. It's my understanding that YouTube and Facebook are privately owned entities. They're not government owned.
Yes, sir.
And as privately entities, they have a right to run their operations the way they want. People may not like it. They can boycott it if they don't like the policies and so forth. They can go to alternative means of communication. But they don't have a right to use the government to go in there and force these places to run the operation to include people that they don't want to include. You know, we may disagree with their policies, but it's not censorship. Censorship is only when the government suppresses speech. And it's never censorship when a private institution says, I'm not going to let you post on my site. That's just private ownership. And again, if people don't like it, they can boycott it. They can go to competitors. But the government should play no role in forcing a private institution to run its operations in a way that other people want them to do.
Okay. And here's my last question. Is there any solution? You mentioned the free market a lot. You said the free market is good to address all these issues like healthcare, education, taxation. Is there any issue that we're facing today that the free market can't solve, in your opinion?
No. The free market is your best vehicle all across the board. And that's what I'm bringing to this campaign is this idea of raising people's vision to a higher level here, that you've got a system here that is inherently defective. And this, especially in healthcare, but also in the economy and the monetary sphere. But like if you take healthcare, I've been saying this for 30 years. This is not a broken system, as the mainstream press often says. Broken means that you could conceivably fix it. Inherently defective means it is incapable of being fixed. It's like a perpetual motion machine, that you can order a perpetual motion machine, and I don't care what you do, you're not going to be able to repair it. It's not fixable. It's inherently defective, can never be made to work. That's the problem with America's socialist healthcare system. You've got Medicare and Medicaid, destroy the fine healthcare system in history, the one I described. And then you've got this centrally managed economy, which is a socialist principle, Centers for Disease Control, FDA, the President's Task Force, Health and Human Services. You've got total dysfunction here. You got shortages of masks, shortages of ventilators, shortages of testing kits, defective testing kits. And then when the system doesn't work, they run around like chickens with their heads cut off and start going with the route of tyranny. And this happens every time. We saw it in the Soviet Union, whose system was based on central planning. When it doesn't work, they move to tyranny, the lockdowns, the arrests, the criminal prosecutions, the little mayors that are turning into their dictatorial people, and the governors too. This is classic socialism, central planning. So there's only one way out of this. I've been saying this for 30 years. You got a lot of libertarians that say, Jacob, we can reform this plan. We can fix it. We libertarians can do this. We're just going to have health savings accounts. Boy, that'll fix the system. They're living in la-la land. Nothing's going to fix this system. The only thing that works is freedom and free market. So we have to just ditch this system entirely, get government entirely out of healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and central planning, have a total free market system. And now, as I was indicating earlier, it's a life or death choice. If people choose to stick with Biden and Trump and the Democrats and Republicans, they're going to live with the consequences and die with the consequences. What I'm saying is that a free market system will tremendously not only lower healthcare costs, they would get back to low and stable where people don't need insurance anymore. It's also the way to significantly reduce the infection and death toll from this coronavirus crisis, because you'd have the dynamics of a free market healthcare system that would be addressing this crisis rather than know-nothing politicians and bureaucrats and central planners. So again, we're talking about a different foundation for America, a different world, a different way to move toward peace, prosperity, liberty, health, and harmony.
I like it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hornberger. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to writing an article about our interview on the California News and Views. Thank you very much for your time, and stay safe, and God bless you. Take care.
You're welcome, Edward. Thank you. It's been a very nice opportunity, and I appreciate you taking the time to ask for me for my perspectives and for sharing them with your viewers and readers.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
Okay. You're welcome.
Here. Bye-bye.